Welcome to episode 173 of the Grip Strip Podcast, the young motorsports icon edition of the Grip Strip Podcast. My name is Philip Matthew. I'm your host, and I'm here with my co-host, the former iRacing Indy 500 champion, computer genius, a gentleman and a scholar. His name is Josh Shafine. What's going on, brother?
Hey, I'm doing great, Phil, and glad you introduced me as one of the champions of the iRacing Indy 500, and you get to say that in front of one of our special guests here, Mr. Young Tommy Kendall.
Yeah, this is I think something I've looked forward to or I've wanted to happen for many years, not just because of my fandom of this man as one of the greatest race car drivers I've ever seen, but then one of the just coolest people and one of the funniest, and just the way that even in post racing retirement or coming back in and then getting back out, that he's still the same genuine guy. Doesn't have the Zach Morris hair anymore like he did back when he was young Tom Kendall, but he still is the original TK. It's Tommy Kendall. Thank you so much for your time at your construction site over there to come on the GSP.
Well, I have to give you. I'm honored to be in the presence of a iRacing Indy 500 champ. That's no joke. I've done a little iRacing, and it's legit. And I know at the high levels, it's really legit. Arguably tougher competition because every other form of racing has a huge barrier to entry. And one thing I've always said is the greatest race car driver ever born might have never gotten in a race car from a talent standpoint, but with iRacing, the barriers are much smaller. So it stands to reason you're pulling from a much deeper pond. So kudos to you and Philip, to you. This dialogue on trying to get me on has literally gone on for, I want to say, at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And your persistence, but nice persistence, because my inboxes, there's so many inboxes now between Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, email, text message. It's like a fire hose. And
Yeah.
sometimes I say, oh, I need to take a little time to respond to that. And then it scrolls into the abyss. And the way my brain works, I forget all about it. And I can forget about it for years. So kudos to you for the gentle prods and so forth. And so I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
Yeah, and I told you, over recent weeks, like how, Ralph Shaheen came on, and it's lucky that I didn't stroke out during that. It's going to be lucky if I don't stroke out during this, because this is just like hero worship going on and like fangirling out, but I'm going to do my best to hold it together here. But you're one of the greatest sports car, Trans Am, road racers ever in the history of this great country, and you've won plenty of championships to show for it. You fit in cars that I don't know how you fit in them. We've joked around about that. You've brought about changes to racetracks in a sense with some of the things that have happened, but deep down inside, you've always been a racer and you've had a passion for racing. And I know it is a family thing. Your dad was involved, and even your brother got involved in it as well. But what was that first thing that really made you want to become a racer when you ended up going and getting your degree, which was definitely not something that was in play back in the day? Your missus is back in the background over there, and you've been together forever. So I always remember that they show the old videos. So it's like, it's funny how all these things connect, but it's like, what was that initial piece that really got you into wanting to race?
Well, it's funny because you have to go back in the time machine a little bit. Now everything is at everyone's fingertips with the internet and so forth, and so your exposure to things is much broader. But when I grew up in La Cañada, which is a little kind of sleepy suburb of Los Angeles, and it's kind of rural, there's a lot of horse trails, horse and so forth. Bottom line, the reason I say that is back then you had 3 television channels. There was no internet. the car magazines came out once a month, and the lead time was like 3 months. So a race coverage was from way, way back. And so this is sort of the backdrop. Bottom line, so if you didn't know someone involved in something and it wasn't a stick and ball sport, you almost, like, I didn't, growing up, I didn't really know there was such a thing as a race car driver. I knew there was an astronaut and so forth. We used to go water skiing. And so I've always been addicted to speed. So whether it was snow skiing, and just pointing them down the hill, or, at the Colorado River on a water ski trip, I'd always, saunter up to figure out what the fastest boat was and try to hitch a ride, And so I was always drawn to it. And first mini bikes and dirt bikes. The car part didn't happen until a little bit later. It wasn't like I was in my my late teens, but we had a neighbor, a guy named Pete Smith, who was the Porsche dealer in North Hollywood, and he sold Newman, Redford, McQueen their cars back in the day. And he had a son my age, so at Little League games, Pete would always roll up, and car dealers never drive the same car 2 weeks in a row. It's on the lot down the road. And so he always had something cool. The first Lamborghini Miura I ever saw was him pulling up. So when my dad, finally started making some money, our company car, our family cars was an LTD and a Country Squire wagon. That's what we drove. And then when my dad started making some money, he built a building for Datsun in the States. And so he got a 240Z. So that was the sportiest car I'd ever been around. But then Pete started blowing in my dad's ear about buying a Carrera and buying a turbo. And then it was, why don't you buy a race car? And so my dad ended up buying a race car, went to Bondurant, and then I went with my dad to Sears Point for the 80 IMSA race. And so that's a long preamble, but because I'd never really been exposed to it, I went to this race, and the noise and the people and my mind was blown. I was like short circuiting. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't think about anything else from that point on. And so I was 13 when that happened. And my dad saw the look in my eyes, and he said, listen, this isn't, you can't do this for a living. This is fun. It's a hobby. You got to stay in school. You got to keep getting good grades. If you do that, we'll do it for fun as much as we can. And so that was the deal. And that's what the school grades were. That's what the college was. And it was just, in my head, it was programmed. Literally, you have to get your college degree. And so partway through UCLA, I was actually making a living racing against his prediction. But it never occurred to me that I was going to stop. It took me longer than I thought. But so that was how that day at Sears Point was when the light went on that this is actually something people do. People race cars. And so, that seems weird telling that story now, but because the internet, every kid is exposed to almost everything on earth pretty quickly if they want, and you go wherever your curiosity takes you. So, and from there, we can go on to whatever else you want to delve into, but that was the genesis of it.
Yeah, that's an awesome, to know that race, that place, and Sears Point is another racetrack that plenty of good, interesting memories took place there. I usually we go and build up what the show will be, but obviously this is the first part, and it's interesting this past weekend how it connects with your legendary career. You brought up prior to the show starting that you were focused on Le Mans, and it was quite an interesting 24-hour, the Centenary Edition, 16 prototype hypercar, whatever you want to call them, GTPs, whatever, even though the hypercars haven't come over here and Glickenhaus is mad that Jim France won't work with them or whatever the heck's going on. But that was one of the best races that we've had in a long time. Toyota's won 5 years in a row, and Ferrari not exactly known in certain places for their strategy or their ability to make the right calls. Even through some issues at night, were able to hold off the all-conquering Toyota team and win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Overall, first time in 50 years that a Ferrari has been, Ferrari factory effort had been there, and it had been even longer since they'd won. Um, one piece that definitely connects to you is Chevy, because there was a time when you were obviously one of the young guns with some guy named Jim Johnson. He was driving there, I think, yesterday, driving a stock car, no less. And you guys are two of the future stars for Chevrolet, and how, of course, through connections and years, I know you guys probably have crossed paths many times, but it's interesting how the Chevy Corvette program, for the last time in the GTE category, now they're going to become a customer program, and you're basically right hand guy. One of your closest friends, Dan Binks, was involved in that program for years. So I guess just talk about what your thoughts were about the race, and some of the memories you have from racing there in the Viper program, which I have obviously a personal love for. The wall behind me has Ben Keating's Viper from when he won at the Rolex. I'd prefer one of the ones you drove, or when you drove for SRT, but we'll see about that one day. But your thoughts on Le Mans and what happened this past weekend, but then also in general, some of the memories that you take away from being there and racing there.
Well, just Le Mans in general. I mean, 100 years, that's one of the things about Indy and so forth. You can't manufacture history in a hurry. It takes 100 years to have it. And there's layers of meaning that get added on, and, tragedies and triumphs and all that stuff that goes into it. And so, I mean, it was amazing to think about 100 years, and the race lived up to that billing. I mean, I'm glad we had, the convergence. It's the first time, I think, in about 40 years that a U.S. class car, has been able to compete for the overall. And so I think 935 would have been the last time that there was any sort of alignment between the top classes. And so, so that was cool. Justin Bell posted a thing saying, we kicked off, we introduced the centenary trophy at Pebble Beach last year. So we kicked off the year-long buildup, and then it seemed like it was a long ways away, and then all of a sudden it was here. But at least two drivers from every class except LMP2 were recent guests of the Torque Show. And it's to see a guy like Pierre Guidi, who's I saw first in the States. He was, I mean, everyone did a fantastic job, but he was the one stint that really put some distance. Was one that he put in. So, and then the GM angle, yesterday would have been a very, very proud day for Herb Fischel, who was the guy that headed up all of GM racing at the time. And my GTP program, the reason that came into being is that was part of Herb's grand plan to get to Le Mans. And it didn't work out with that particular car, but then that early Cadillac program was an offshoot. And it was interesting to see the design cue. If you look at the forward of the rear wheel, the side pod of that car looks a lot like that early Cadillac. And so Herb was one of the great, I mean, he was instrumental in my career because he kind of plucked me out of the Mazda, saw me as the first sort of clean cut, articulate, sort of modern day racer, which now everyone's that way so much that it's almost, you're looking for a little bit roughness to it. But back then that was so unusual. He plucked me out, put me in the Beretta program, and worked me up through the ranks. And then that was also the same program that identified Sharp was the next one. The next one after that was Jeff Gordon. The next one after that was Rick Johnson, the Supercross guy, and the next one after that was Jimmy Johnson. Were Herb's pet project guys, and so there's a lot of themes, and that's one thing that's wild when I look back on my career. You talked about threads. I've got they run through Sears Point a lot. They run through Watkins Glen a lot. They run through NASCAR a little bit, and so I've just had this really wild, even though my career was pretty short, 10, 12 years, the serious part of it. Paul Newman stuff, it just there was a lot of incredible things. And Le Mans actually wasn't really part of it. The two times I went to Le Mans were post my serious career. 97 was end of 97 is when I retired, and came back to drive in 2000 and then also in the Viper program. So I don't have any regrets per se. It would have been nice to have tackled Le Mans when I was as sharp as I was back in the day and with a group that I had gelled with like I had. But it wasn't certainly wasn't it just wasn't meant to be. That track is there's a reason it lasted for 100 years. Le Mans is because, and just like there's a reason Indy's been around for so long, it really is special and different. Um, Another level of risk, another level of challenge, another level of speed over almost anywhere, and so that's why it has persevered. I think, but a part of it, some of it is good fortune and other things, but the races that stick around for a long time are remarkable, and so it was cool to watch that yesterday. I don't stay up and watch the full 24 anymore, but I did devote a good bit of time to watching.
And I mean, you brought it up that the 51 Ferrari with Per Guidi, who's a multiple-time world champion in GT. Two of their three drivers are world champions in GT, but now they're in the prototype program. You had Charles Leclerc there visiting. Of course, he's one of the two Formula One drivers. But I brought up Ben Keating, brought up the Viper. He's been one of the great gentleman drivers, and he is a legitimate driver, and he loves racing. To convince Chevrolet he was one of the only people I think that could have convinced Chevrolet to run a customer program, and they have run so well that they basically locked up the GT-AM title already 3 races into the season. Probably, in Monza they'll definitely lock it up by running however much distance they have to. But I mean, I think I remember your 2 years with the SRT program. The BOP was just garbage, and you guys struggled. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. The BOP is horrible because we're getting held back. Because in the IMSA, when you guys were in the IMSA championship, it was a way more balanced deal, and it was way more competitive, obviously, to where you're able to compete for wins. You're competing against Corvette. You're competing against these other teams. But that's just my personal bias aside because I wanted to see you win. But
Well, BOP is kind of, in my mind, is fatally flawed. I get why it's done, and they've gotten way better at it. But the nature of it is almost impossible to get right. And the other part it does, like I watched Le Mans, I watched it closely, but I don't know honestly who did the best job there, and that's the real shame of BOP. So when you watch, because it's artificially manipulated, like in Formula One who's doing the best job, in IndyCar who's doing the best job, in NASCAR who's doing the best job, because there's a set of rules that everyone competes to, and they don't adjust people, and so again, I get why it's there, but it's sort of fatally flawed sometimes. And so what ends up happening, it's still hard to execute. Now, if we had the good BOP when I went in the Viper, and the story I had in my head, I had convinced myself that we were going to be ready to win that race and so forth. And we get there, and I saw every grandstand had a grandstand sized banner with a Porsche on it. It was the 50th anniversary of the 911, and we were racing against the 911. We go out in the first test session, and it's not even close. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But and so it kind of rotates. It rotates around. Even some of it is probably some politicking, effective politicking, and some of it is just they're doing their best and they overshoot a little bit on the adjustment or so forth and so on. But the key takeaway is it is what it is, and it's here to stay for now. You need to, when it's your time and you have the BOP, you better execute. And so we didn't do that year with the Viper. We weren't fast enough to win, but we also made a handful of mistakes, and had a flat tire, and so bottom line, even if we were the quickest car, we weren't going to win that year because we didn't execute. And so that was kind of my takeaway. As long as BOP is here, and I got to think there's actually a better way, but as long as it's here, you better wait for when it kind of comes right for you. You better seize those. And so that's like Ferrari. They had arguably, probably all things considered, they had the best BOP, but they also executed perfectly. And so that's kind of that's a bit of a bummer for me with sports car racing in general right now. Is I'd love to see them get back to some sort of equivalency formula where it's it's a set amount of fuel, because right now some people have more power, but they also get more fuel, but they also have more weight. Back in the old day with IMSA, and maybe there's a reason why this wouldn't work today, but you had a slope of a line with displacement and weight, and there was a correction factor for turbocharging, and you did whatever you wanted. And so if you were getting waxed, you had to figure out, I need to go in a different place on that line and outcompete the people at the same place or whatever. I like that better. And if someone had a package, often it wasn't as close racing because someone was better, but do you want to see close racing or do you want to see excellence in racing? So I don't know what the right answer to that is, but that's kind of the framing for it. And so Formula One, you're seeing that play out. You saw dominance before by Mercedes. You're seeing dominance right now by Red Bull. I think dominance is okay because it never lasts forever. And it's also like when someone beat the Bulls, you knew that you were watching. Like when the Golden State Warriors first started ascending, you knew you were seeing something special when they're knocking off the last dynasty. Right now, when you see a win, you're like, they did a great job, but are they really outperforming everybody else, or is it just BOP's the wind at their back? That was a rambling answer. I hope that made sense, but that's sort of my beef with that.
Yeah. I mean, I figured I mentioned that. I figured that would open up some avenues there. I mean, I remember that with the I have it over here. I'll go and take my screen and adjust it here if I can do it. Give me a second here. I'm gonna go and show the picture. It's an autographed picture from you, showing a car that has clear connections to cars that came after, like you mentioned, the Cadillac and to today's Cadillac prototype. And I mean, now the prototype that you drove, of course, the Intrepid, essentially looked like the Riley DP. The front end was basically the same. The greenhouse was a lot, no offense to Bill Riley, but the greenhouse on the DP was not as aesthetically pleasing as it was on your car. But I think that was more a box of where they had to work within. But then that was the most dominant car.
Early DP regulations had that. Yeah, had that sort of odd
shape.
So, yeah,
that's why we had some of those goofy looking cars, and then Max Crawford came out with his, and then we can make it look good.
Perfectly said. You're right.
Yeah. So I mean that's. So yeah, okay. So here we go. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to move over. That's the Ben Keating car. And over there on the top is blurry. Your first. It's still a little blurry, but it is your first Trans Am Championship Beretta, Turbo Beretta back in the day of when you had all the different you're talking about all the different types of engines you had in there, V6s, V8s, Turbo 4s. This is on the heels after Audi went and with Hurley Haywood and Hans Stuck with the all-wheel drive Quattro and had made SCCA basically change the rule book. But you and Chris Neifel, the tallest duo I think in the history of motorsports, dominated in 1990, and you ended up winning that championship, and that led to the Intrepid program. And you've talked about it over the years, and it's interesting. Like, yeah, it wasn't Herb Fischel wanted to bring it to Le Mans. I guess that's where, in the end, it worked out with the Corvette program. But yes, you could still have these connections. You could still see cues that were in the 90s, 30 plus years later, 30, 40 years later in motorsport. And I think that's one thing that makes it so cool. I think it's one thing that makes it legends like yourself. For fans who have been longtime fans or for new fans, you can always learn and you can always see things that connect the sport together. I mean, I wanted to bring up, of course, your 4-time Trans Am champion, should be 5. Gentilozzi screwed you over with that engine, but That was when TK got called out of retirement to be the test driver for that 4.5 liter Jaguar engine. And I don't know how many mechanicals you had, but it was too many, unfortunately, and seemed convenient. I think
I've tuned some of those out. I used to know exactly how many, but funny story about that is, well, when Paul called me, and we were bitter rivals is not an overstatement.
Mhm.
And he called me and says, "Hey, Pruitt signed with Lexus. Jag, I've committed to them that this 4-valve has to win the title. Are you interested?" I'm like, well. And so he has a reputation for a number of things, including not always paying. And so, anyways, I ran the math and I said, you know what? I'll do this. And my dad actually called me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Dad, I've assumed that the deal's going to change from what was promised. I'm assuming I'm not going to get all my pay." And he said, "So why are you doing this?" I said, "My only objective is to have fun and drive a good car." And I thought that it was going to be really competitive. In fairness to Paul, I did get paid all my money, so that I was kind of in a minority in that, but I did get paid all my money. The deal did change from what was told, but so anyways, the 4-valve I thought was fully sorted and so forth. It wasn't. So we blew up, leading 3 of the first 4 races, I think. And
I remember Long Beach.
Paul Newman came to me and said, "You know, he's got a button in his car to blow your car up." It looks that way. I guess maybe, but I don't think so. So, but that's what it looked like to Paul. So,
Yeah.
well, and so fast forward, we got to the last race, and then the car came right, and I started winning. But then Paul was, I think, enjoying being out in front and so forth. And so, even though he was in the 2-valve, it didn't quite work out. We ended up dead tied, and then he won the tiebreaker because all my DNFs early in the year. So, anyways, I don't have any regrets about that either. I would have loved a 5th title, but c'est la vie. I did actually have a very good time that year. I really enjoyed the driving that year, which was my objective. So, we digressed. I don't know, weaving all around there.
Yeah.
That I don't know if you want to talk about that first Beretta. It's funny. I had myself convinced at the time when we were doing the clay model, it was the greenhouse was shrunk, the driver's seat was way in the center. It really was kind of a funny car. And now I see pictures of it, I'm like, wow, that doesn't look anything like the car,
Yeah.
But back then we had ourselves convinced that because the silhouette, the center line, other than the hood scoop from bumper to bumper and the wing, actually lined up with a stock Beretta, but everything else was dramatically different. I actually have one of the cars. I have the car that I won Elkhart Lake with. I haven't ever raced it. I've had it since. I got it as part of my last Chevrolet contract in '92, and so Binks, it's back at Binks's, and at some point we'll go through it and get it freshened up. Probably needs new fuel cell and it needs some work, but at some point I'd like to get that one out. But that car was, had the same sponsorship basically as the Williams F1 car. I really pushed to do the graphics exactly the same, and we did a photo shoot at Phoenix that year with the Williams team with Patrese and Boutsen, and it really, iconic looking livery, and it really popped. So good stuff.
Yeah, and you and Chris Neifel had a good time driving it. You were having a battle talking about P.L. Newman, who is also one of my heroes, not just because I somehow or another got lucky enough to share the same birthday with him, but also because he's an absolute motorsports icon and an acting icon too. But I think of Paul Newman more as a race car driver personally, because it's just cool how he came out, and that connects to your Ford thing. You were a Chevy guy, the prototype program with Jim Miller and everything. Didn't, after the injury, it didn't stay together or whatever. I'm not sure how it all kind of worked out, but you became a free agent, and to be a free agent when you're as good as you are, and Jack Roush swooped in and signed you to drive GTO. I think it was 1993, and it was I guess you were essentially taking over for Robbie Gordon because Robbie Gordon got the call to drive IndyCar. Little did we know that that would lead to about 5 or 6 years of basically dominance, but that's where it started. I guess we connect from Chevy. We talked about Jaguar. I didn't get Mopar in. We'll get that one next, but talk about those days with Ford and the Roush Racing program when the All Sport Mustang, uh, winning in GTO with them, and also I guess it connects with Paul Newman because you got to drive with him in 1995, and one Mark Martin to go and Michael Brockman to win the Rolex 24 in the GTS 1 class, I think it was called back then. I think you finished in the top 5 in the race or something too.
Third, actually, yeah.
Yeah. Because it was a Porsche Kramer car that won overall because all the WSC cars were like flaming out or whatever. So it was a Porsche Kramer that won the race overall.
I actually had forgotten who had won overall that year. I know in '93, when we finished second overall, the Gurney car, we almost won overall that year. There was only one car, the Gurney car finished in front of us. But the Chevy to Ford transition, actually, is this okay with the sun? Do I need to?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, basically, once I started winning, after GTU and winning in Trans Am with Chevy, I used to get overtures from Ford. Lee Morris was there at the time, and I told him, I said, I'm flattered, but I said I don't like playing one group against the other, and so I said, as long as Chevy makes my deal, I'm probably going to stay here. But if and he said, well, if they ever don't, let us know. And so basically, when I came back from my accident in '91, Chevy was, I think, maybe, I don't remember exactly what was going on economically at the time, but basically Jim Miller built the car to prove its competitiveness, build the Riley design. And his idea was that he was then going to step back and not have to write any more checks, but still run the team, kind of like the Corvette program. Well, I got hurt, which threw a big monkey wrench into it. Chevy kind of pulled back and didn't step up for the full thing. Jim Miller, to his credit, told me that there was a car waiting for me when I was able. So when it was looking like I was going to be able to run in '92, he said, well, we'll run the full season. And I said, well, what, Chevy's not stepping up? He says, yeah, but I made you a promise. And I said, that's incredibly forthright or, upstanding. But I said, you don't have to do that. Let's run as many races as their money will allow us. And so we did that. And the car had been leapfrogged already, basically, by the new Jag and the new Toyota. And so, we weren't terribly competitive. We finished second at Road Atlanta, and the Nissans both crashed out spectacularly, but we weren't really that competitive. And so I kept thinking the sun's getting lower, not higher. So now I'm going to be in the full sun. So, but anyway, that's I'm going to scoot over here, or I'm going to get turned into a lobster. Sorry for this, but so at the as the it became clear that they were going to basically pull out of GTP at the end of that year, and they weren't competitive and so forth. And so I started scrambling, saying, "What I wanted to go back to Trans Am," and so I proposed going back to Trans Am, and basically it was one of these things where with Herb, before anything I wanted to do, as long as he could make some case for it, it happened. Mountains got moved. I had an IndyCar test. I did some races with Earnhardt in that EDS car, but there was just a subtle change, and no matter how much sense it seemed to make what I was offering, they said, well, we've got Buzz McCall's team. And I'm like, Buzz McCall's team, we used to smoke them, and they're only the factory team because we went to GTP. And then I said, what about a fifth wheel with a single car with Binks and I? And you're like, yeah, no, we probably can't do that. And so the writing was on the wall. I equate it to being when you get put in the friend zone by a girl, and you're trying everything, and they've always got an answer for it. And I'm like, okay. So I said, they weren't going to drop me because I just come back from my accident, but I think I was going to literally kind of be almost put out to pasture. I think I would have been doing more marketing stuff, maybe run Cup road races or this, that, and the other. And I said, I need a full-time ride to show that I still have the goods, because that wasn't exactly obvious in that little brief moment in time. And so Ford had said, if you're ever interested, let us know. So I let them know. And Max Jones had been my teammate before, and he drove a year at Roush, but then he was put into team management. His career basically was ending, but he was then becoming a team manager. They had this new GTS program. Jack wanted to know if I was damaged goods. And Max assured him, nope, he's not. And so the deal went together. And then, we went to Daytona, won the Rolex, my very first race in a Ford, won the championship that year. And so the funny part is from that moment on, the overtures started coming from Chevy again. They never came direct. They always came through a weird side channel. A friend of mine that was a dealer says, hey, Herb was sort of asking about you. And I said, I'm going to tell him the same thing I told Ford. I don't like playing one against the other. So, they let me go. And so that's how it goes. And it became I wasn't in the meeting, so this is what was told to me. And then when I started going on the run with Trans Am, the championships, I heard it was an explicit Chevrolet race shop goal. The first goal was to win the IndyCar championship. Second goal was to win the NASCAR championship. Third goal was to specifically beat me. And with Buzz McCall's team, which of course, that first year Pruitt, I did finish third, and Pruitt won the championship. But after that, they couldn't get it accomplished. So that was satisfying. A little backstory. I don't hold any ill will. Herb did a tremendous amount for my career, and I could see why he thought, that part of the reason we weren't as competitive in the prototype was maybe because of me. Turns out it wasn't. It was the other cars that sort of leapfrogged past us. Definitely. But I had to. Yeah, that's why that year was so pivotal. I had to get back to laying down the laps and winning. Nothing like that to speak for you.
Yeah, and I mean that going to that program with Roush, and then how you and Binksy went and took the iconic all sport Mustang. I mean, I don't know how many Hot Wheels of that particular car, whether it's in that kind of paint scheme or whatever, how many of those Trans Am Mustangs I have. And it's mainly because you drove that car and you won so much. And I mean, it's interesting. We talked about, Lamar, we talk about Trans Am. It also brings about, I talked about Mark Martin. You and him had a great podcast went on his show, talked about Sonoma 1991. When I just hear Bob Jenkins, it's the reason why I always joke around and I always emphasize it, because I just hear Bob Jenkins' booming voice saying young Tom Kendall in the 42 mellow yellow Pontiac, filling in for Kyle Petty. And then Kyle Petty's all happy sitting there. I mean, he's not happy he had a broken leg, but he's like, yeah, I think we hired the best person we could possibly find to go and drive that car. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. And he kept on saying young Tom Kendall. And I always, back in those days, in the 90s, it was you and Scott Sharp, because Scott Sharp looked like he was 12 until, I don't know, the late 90s. But they always emphasize that, and I always got a kick out of it. I mean, yeah, you definitely look young. You had the Zach Morris look and the whole bit, and I get it, and clean cut and all that. But then they just emphasized it. I'm like, we know he's young. I get it. Like, if somebody would go and say young William Byron, I mean, they say YRB for Blaney, but they don't really reference it that way anymore. Mm-hmm. But they don't emphasize it. But then it's also Bob Jenkins, so that's probably
it's also, that showed you how much things change, because when I won my championships, you could not get a professional national license until you're 18. Now you can get that when you're, I think, 14. And so to have the prime of guys was really late 20s and 30s. Like Earnhardt really, I think, won his first title. He was 29 or 30. Yep. It was a different era in terms of youth, and so it was remarkable then. Now it's not. Like I said, you've got guys. Graham Rahal has 200 something starts, and he's, how old is he now? 250 starts, and he's not 45. He's like 35. So yeah. So it is, but that does make sense. I was wondering where that got burned into your psyche. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was, I mean, that race was, and it was 2 weeks before my big accident.
Yeah.
And so Gary Nelson was the crew chief on that car, which you
Mm-hmm.
might not have known before he went on to be, NASCAR tech director and so forth. And so we had a great rapport, and he was clearly an advanced thinker, very open-minded, which was one of the challenges in the NASCAR days in terms of trying new stuff and the 2 master cylinders for brakes instead of 1, and so forth and so on. So it was a proper road race car. They also were the first guys, I think, to figure out stopping before the yellows on road courses rather than on the yellows on the ovals.
Yeah.
And now everyone knows that. But so I was checked out, and we were going to win that race if Richard doesn't have his crash. And it was a legit yellow, though, because I think he broke his foot, it turned out. I'm not sure that was publicized. But but that's what bunched everyone up and set up that final thing. And so it was fun to go on Mark's show, because the whole time we were stationed next to each other in the paddock there, and after the race it was tense, but nothing was said. His father never spoke to me again, but Mark and I were teammates for 5 years at Roush, and shared the car twice at Daytona, and had a good rapport and became good friends, but never talked about that. Never ever talked until that podcast, and someone suggested it on Twitter. You ought to have Kendall on and talk about Sears Point. He's like,
I think it was me. I think it was me.
Well, look at you. Good for you.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm like, once Mark started talking about his podcast, everyone was into it. Like Josh and I, we listen to, DJD and stuff like that. But Mark was big on it and talking about his history, and the fact that he remembers the springs and his chassis setup from 1974 is insane to me. But he can tell it to you like verbatim. But I was like, that might be a good one, because it was coming around the time, I don't know how many years after it had happened. And I was like, it's an anniversary or something close to something like that. And I'm like, I think that'd be a cool thing. And I don't know if I mentioned it to you or I just randomly posted, but I feel like it was me. I'll take credit for it just for the sake of it, because it was a good show. But
it probably was. It was on Twitter. Twitter. And he saw it and said, that's a good idea. What do you think? And I said, let's do it. So you tagged both of us. So we were both on the thread. Yeah. That was so. Kudos to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because it's also interesting you brought it up, how you guys are teammates. You're basically the 2 biggest guys at the team, and you were winning, he was winning. He had, I think, the last year was 98, right? Your last year was for 97. 97. All right, so you had 98 was a year that basically any other year he could have won the championship, but Jeff went and won 13 races. So in the Rainbow Warriors with Ray Evernham, which connects to the Garage 56 because of Chad Knaus and Jimmy and all these things. And I mean, I'm curious because you had the NASCAR, you had the taste of NASCAR, you had that opportunity way back when with Gary Nelson and Felix Sabates. You brought up Dale Earnhardt, and you've said it in many interviews how much you looked up to him and how you're driven for Jimmy Means. I think you drove for Mark Reno as well, maybe I'm maybe mistaking it, but
you're right. Reno ran the Earnhardt EDS program. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, because Mark Reno was close friends with Ernie Irvan, so I always connect Mark Reno with Ernie, and Ernie was also. I mean, it's all kind of crazy how it all connects. But you got experience. You even ran ovals a little bit. Was there ever a desire once you had finished that Trans Am run, or was it ever offered to you to jump in a truck or jump in a Busch car or anything from Roush?
It was offered. Well, yes, it was offered by Roush. That was actually why the partying was acrimonious with Roush, because in '97, I was never willing to move to Charlotte. Okay. Mm-hmm. I just didn't want to do it. Wasn't up. Later on I would have, I guess, but at the time I wasn't willing to move to Charlotte. So, and I didn't. And everybody said you got to be in Charlotte. They were probably right. To really get immersed and figure it out. But in '97, when it was clear that Trans Am Ford was going to pull out at the end of '97, then that's a different scenario. So they started talking about a truck program, And I said, well, I'm open to it. They said, well, we've got this new truck program. It's 4 years. And I'm like, oh, 4 years. Wow. Okay. That's a big commitment, and long story, try to shorten the story a little bit, but, the first offer was just super low ball. And I said, yeah, not interested in that. And the offer kept doubling. And this was also while the win streak was starting. It was early in the year, early in the win streak, but then as the win streak continued, it was 5 races, it was 6, it was 7, it was 8, it was 9. And so I kept, after it doubled twice, numbers get big in a hurry when you double them twice.
Yeah.
And so, it was weird because they said, this is 4 years of truck. There's no cup promise. And so I'm like, okay, I'm open to whatever, but 4 years of trucks is 4 years of trucks.
Yeah.
So it needs to be, especially by the end, pretty sweetened deal. And I'd say, well, what about, they said, well, the early offer that was a low ball, I said, I think I'm going to do better than you think I am, and you obviously think so, or you wouldn't hire me. Let's put some big incentives in there, like big incentives for wins and championships. And like, yeah, we can't do that. I said, well, that protects you if I don't run well. And if I win 6 races, you ought to be happy for the big bonuses, And so long story short, it kept growing. And pretty soon it was a pretty big number. And we were still a little ways apart. And I said to him, I said, it seems like you guys are out of cash and I'm not ready to commit yet. What about my car, the all sport car? And I was negotiating with the CEO of Roush Industries, a guy named Evan Lyle, not Jeff Smith, who was the head of Roush Racing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, are you saying if we throw the car in, we have a deal? I said, putting a pretty big valuation on that car when you multiply it over 4 years. But I said, yes, if the car is in the deal, we have a deal. And I figured out basically the reason the deal kept getting bigger was I figured out they had a sponsor that was demanding that I was the driver because what was weird about it is I'd been there for 5 years and I'd never so much as driven a lap in one of, I don't know how many, he had 4 cup cars and 3 Busch cars and 4 trucks. There were so many cars and it was never a sub. It was never a this, which they never promised me. But it was a little weird that you have a guy that's just knocking the cover off the ball over here. And it was probably partially, and so then all of a sudden to be so lathered up coming at me with all this. And so I finally figured out that's what was likely going on behind the scenes. I don't think I've ever told this story in this much detail, but they came back and said, how about an option on the car? And I said, well, he says, because, and here, no point not sharing the details. Evan said, that's the kind of thing that Jack would maybe like to give you if you won the championship or something. And I'm thinking, well, I've won 4 championships here in 5 years, and he hasn't given me so much as a pen more than my contract calls for, which is fine but it's not likely that he's given me the car. So I said to him, so first of all, I said, well, what about an option? I presented the option. He says, they go, oh, well, we can do an option. I said, okay, if you do an option on the car, we have a deal. He says, okay, we got a deal. He says, we're drawing up the contracts and we're FedExing them to you. And so I said, okay. And he says, as soon as you get it, you have to sign it, fax us. This was before email. You have to fax us your signature and FedEx it back. I said, deal. So the next day or whatever day the FedEx was supposed to get there, I called him and there's an email it was an email. So I called and said, hey, the FedEx didn't arrive. And he says, okay, we're running a tracer on it. By the way, the car is out of the deal. And I said, well, the car is what made the deal. So, and this answer was, well, we still think it's a very good offer. I said, well, it's not what we agreed to, and it's not a deal. And so that's how the deal came apart. And then what had happened, a couple of things happened. One, Greg Biffle had entered the frame through, and it was Granger that was driving the urgency. So Biffle had entered, but another thing happened, I think, and I don't have confirmation. I should actually ask Jack this because deals change, and I wasn't upset about it until they laid the blame on me in the press afterwards that I kept changing the deal. When in fact, the exact opposite is true. And so they changed the deal. But what I think happened is Evan was a good friend of mine. I haven't spoken to him. We're on good terms. I think he wanted the deal to happen so badly that he thought, and he was the CEO, he could do whatever he wanted, generally speaking. I think he did this, and when he went to Jack, I don't think he said, we have a deal and this is the deal. I think he said, what do you think about an option on that car? And I think Jack probably said, no way. So rather than saying we've already agreed to it, I think that's when the thing came to me. By the way, the car is out of the deal.
Yeah.
So I don't know for sure but I don't know why Jack would get up in front of all the AP and everybody and tell a lie unless he'd been given the wrong information. So I don't know the exact story, but I'm guessing that's probably what happened. I would have liked that car.
Yeah.
I've got my first 5 championship cars, but the one I would like the most is that one.
Is that one?
But again, things happen the way they're meant to. It was phenomenal for Biffle. I think Biffle thanked me after his first win. I think he'd been told kind of a wrong version of the story, namely that I kept changing the deal, which wasn't true. But when I finally met Biffle, it was only recently. I told him the real story, and I said, "I'm happy for you. It worked out awesome for you. It worked out awesome for me." So that was my first offer for Cup. But when the Roush deal ended, I got an offer, full-time offer in the second Yates car, which was starting up that year. And it was
The
triple the
88
money.
car.
Yes, it was triple the money. The 88 car. Yes. So it was huge money, but I turned it down. There's 2 pieces to that. I was kind of burnt out. And the thought of doing 3 times as many races, I just didn't think I could do. The other part of that was this was before the Roush deal formally ended. I knew I wasn't getting the truck deal, but the season was still going and I was still under contract. The season had just ended. There was this year-end event at Road Atlanta. It was one of the cooler sponsor events that ever was. Jack would bring all the Trans Am cars, all the Cup cars. It was Busch then and trucks and some Bondurant cars. He'd bring his P-51 Mustangs. They'd be at the airport. And basically every sponsor could bring like 4 people. And it was like the ultimate fun day. We called it Fun Days. It was the ultimate fun day boondoggle. And I gave rides in the race car. We gave rides in the race car. Certain people got to drive some of the race cars. One of the Valvoline guys actually put Mark's Valvoline Xfinity car on its lid that day. One of the years. But it's funny because my contract with Roush was really explicit on taking sponsors, and the penalties were literally a penalty of 3 times the amount of the sponsorship you would have to pay. And so when I was approached by Yates, I said, one of the sponsors they were talking to was Family Channel. And I said, just to let you know, I said, if it's Family Channel, I can't do it because of this contract. And so they said, okay, we still want to do the deal. And so I get a call from Max Jones after, and things kind of were tense. We won the championship, but the way things ended and them saying I was changing the deal, things were tense at the end of that 97 season. We won the championship. We won the 11 in a row, all that stuff. But Max called me and he said, I understand you're trying to steal our sponsors, and we're not really excited about having you come to Fun Days and be around all of our sponsors. And I said, do you want to hear my side of the story? He says, nope, I'm just delivering the message. I said, okay. So what are you saying? He says, you're uninvited to Fun Days, which was fine with me because all I did, I sweated my ass off giving rides for 5 hours a day. So it wasn't like I needed to do that, but I would have told him, I told the other team that it can't be one of Roush's sponsors or I can't do the deal. So that's what I would have, if he wanted to hear my side of the story. He didn't want to hear my side of the story at the time. He since has heard it. But so anyways, so that was my other, so I ultimately turned down the Yates deal, and they wouldn't accept my no at first. I said, and she goes, take a week. The gal that was putting the deal together, I said, I don't think it's going to change, but I'll take a week. And a week later, I said, my mind hasn't changed, and I turned the deal down. And I think, was it Kenny Irwin that drove it that
Yeah, so
first
that's a
year?
Texaco Haviland. Yeah, based on the
Irwin.
timing. Yeah, that's when because they had ran Ernie out the door because he messed up at the banquet. Didn't think Texaco Haviland or something by mistake. Which at the end of the day, when your Ernie almost passed away and he comes back and finishes 10th in points with one eye, and he finished 10th in points. Now, of course, Todd Parrott in the 88, he basically shoved everything over there with him and DJ. Um, and that changed the whole deal. And then once you were talking about the timing of it, I'm like, that probably either is they're making another car or they were hiring you to run the Texaco Avalon Ford, which would have been pretty crazy. But in considering how bad it went that first year, I think it was definitely a good call on your part. Kenny Irwin did figure it out in his second year, and unfortunately, in his third season, went to Felix, and that was a bad time in NASCAR in general. So, but yeah, that was one. And then when you were talking about 4-year deal, I'm like, that has to be Granger. I'm like, it's either Granger or LCI. And then I'm like, you're going to talk about Biffle at some point. And then you brought it. That's what they had because Benny Parsons had basically because of winter heat was propping up Biffle. That was when the Roush Gong Show stuff was going on. He was relatively young for that age, not to, the fact that Kurt Busch came in at 20 whatever years old a couple of years later is a whole other thing. But, I mean, that makes so much sense because it's like, 4-year deal. And I'm thinking about the timing of it. I'm like, that sounds like Granger. And if you had been in that truck, I think, God bless Greg Biffle. He won Truck Series Championship, Xfinity Championship, or Busch Championship, and then went to Cup and had a great career. But I think that would have been pretty interesting if that had been the case. But I was always curious as to, when you stopped, you basically, quietly went about it. But of course, Roush handled it the way they did, and then you became an announcer. Did you ever think that after all these years of racing that you were going to go and get behind the mic and become an announcer? Because then you covered the IndyCar series and you were there and you met the other TK because you're the original TK, and Antoine Canan came along amongst his best buddy Helio Castro Dash Neves back in. He wasn't shoe polishing his hair back then, but you met all those guys. You worked with Bob Varsha, the legend. What brought that about? That you went from four Trans Am championships or 3 Trans Am championships in a row to I'm going to work for ESPN. I'm going to call IndyCar races.
Well, it actually my debut came during the '97 season, and it was in the run up to Elkhart, because Elkhart was the debut. But so I was on my win streak. Steve Bime was the director for the ABC ABC shows, IndyCar shows, and the producer was, I think, maybe Bob Goodrich. Anyways, so the producer, World Cup was happening, and so he was doing World Cup, and so they promoted Bime. Bime apparently had been whispering in their ear saying, "Hey, I think Kendall would be great on these telecasts, so why don't we bring him in?" And they said they weren't interested. When they made him producer, he said, "I want to bring Kendall in for Elkhart Lake," and they're like, we don't like the idea. And he's like, "Am I the producer or am I not?" And they're like, "Okay." So he's the producer. So he called me and asked if I wanted to do it, and I said, "I don't think I can." He said, "What do you mean? You're going to be there?" I said, "I know, but we race on Saturday, and Saturday night I'm going to be at Siebkens." And I said, "I don't think I'm going to be in any shape to call TV on Sunday." And he's like, "Are you serious?" I said, "I'm just telling you the way it is." I said, "Either the streak will be 10 in a row or it'll be over." And at Siebkens, I said, "I'm guarantee it's going to. And so he's like, "Wow." He said, "I think you've got your priorities messed up." I said, "Well, I think they're perfectly straight." So anyways, he started saying, he said, "Well, what if you don't have to be there early?" I said, "Or we don't have any meetings during the week. Your first meeting is Sunday. You don't have to be there real early." I'm like, "Okay, now you're talking." And so long story short, I agreed to do it. the Siebkens night is part of Siebkens lore now because I drank. Well, I don't know how much I drank, but I close to a yard of Jägermeister because well, three yards were consumed, and I was dishing a bunch of it. And because I went there, well, I just tell that whole story. So I went there on Friday, and everyone's like, "Have a shot," and I said, "I'm not having a shot." They're like, "Come on, you always have a shot." I said, "No, I always have a shot after the race. Race is tomorrow, no shots." They're like, "Come on, it's Siebkens." I'm like, "No, not having a shot." So I said, "Tomorrow night," I said, "I'll drink a yard of Jägermeister, but I'm not having a shot tonight." That was the quote. Well, the next night, I'm literally not even off the sidewalk. I'm walking up, and someone says, "They're waiting for you." And I walk in, and they have, I think it was a half yard, as it turns out, but a bottle of Jaeger fills up a half a yard of Jaeger. And I refilled it twice. And now, in spite of what this sounds like, I've never been a huge drinker. It used to be the only time I drank all year was at Siebkens once a year. And then but I've never been a big drinker. I've never had a lot of tolerance. So in my head, I'm thinking, I can't drink this. I got to give as much of this away as I can, But when you're pouring shots for other people, you end up having one. So God knows how many I had. I had a lot of Jaeger. Someone drove me back to the hotel. I overslept the next morning. I woke up. I'm like, oh, my meeting's in like 25 minutes. I pile into my car. I said, I wasn't shaved. Didn't shower. I said, I'll come back to the hotel after the meeting. I walk in late. My hair's like this. I had a Spam t-shirt was the t-shirt I grabbed. I said, I warned you guys. And they're like, oh my God. And so that was the setup. I went back to shave and shower. I got stuck in traffic. I was almost late for the race. We ended up getting a rain delay. So instead of I don't know, 10 minutes, 12-minute pre-show before the green, we had to fill for like an hour and a half. And this is my first time on TV, and I'm not feeling great. But I'm in there. I'm in the booth at first for the pre-show with Sullivan and Varsha. And then Bime wanted me in my own little tower down in turn five for the race. And so, I just let it rip, partially because I didn't feel well, partially because I sensed that people wanted something different than TV. And now that's pretty commonplace. Back then it wasn't obvious that that's what people wanted. And so, the one memory, other than there's a couple, they sent me on my way with a pack to go interview Mario and Michael, the stall, we needed to fill time. So I go over to the hospitality, I interview Mario and Michael, and I'm standing there, and they're a foot shorter than I am. And so I literally, I'm talking to the camera, and then and we're using the same mic, and I'm like bending down, and I'm like, I still remember that, the up and down of that. And then when I get to the tower and I start climbing up the scaffolding, I think Hobbs might have been in that grandstand. Someone was in the grandstand and said, Siebkens! They were yelling about Siebkens the night before. And I was like, so we get through the race. The race was good. Call was good. Again, I didn't feel great. It was my first time on TV. I probably wasn't as smooth as I could have been. After the race, I called my mom, and I said, how'd it go? She goes, you sounded good, but you looked really pale. She had no idea what had happened the night before. So anyway, so that was my television debut. The next year, I think I did 5 races with them. So to answer your original question, I didn't have a grand plan. Everything kind of fell in my lap. After that first time, one of the challenges was I liked it. And so I said, how do I keep that same I don't care attitude when I do care? So this is this is a little bit towards, you being nervous or, I've always been good at being kind of my own shrink and figuring out a way to talk to myself. And so my little mantra was, before I went on the air, was try to get fired a little bit today as a way to keep the fear at bay, because, the owners back then especially were really powerful. So if you hurt someone's feeling or, you can get fired. So I'm like, that might be part of the deal. So don't get too attached to this and let it rip. So that was sort of my and I have been fired, I guess. I in essence got fired because when it went from Fox to NBC on the sports cars, Justin and I didn't get asked over, and they're like, he said, well, we just didn't get asked over. I said, when you've been doing it for 10 years and they don't ask you over, that's getting fired. So,
Yeah,
but
that's
I,
definitely missing. Yeah, you guys being on there, and Justin will always get himself into some interesting stuff. But then I think he took that from Uncle Habo there in a lot of ways, because I think kindred spirits in a lot of ways.
yeah, it's funny. I was asked specifically by a journalist, "Do you ever worry about getting fired?" And when I got the offer to do the full season in like 02, 03, 02, I think was the first year. Eric Johnson interviewed me. I said, I'm not stupid. I understand that the power dynamics and how this works. I said, but I said, if some owner gets his panties in a wad or an official or whatever and wants to fire me, I said, the fans like me and they like what I'm saying. So I said, you're in essence, if you fire me, as long as I don't do something obviously horrific, but if I am just dancing on the line, which is what I do, if you fire me, you're firing your fans. I said, that's not a great way to run a entertainment venue. And so I said it's a sort of perverse job security. Whether it actually keeps me on my job or not, I don't know. But that's how I just reminded myself. I said I work for them, even though my paycheck comes from them.
Josh, you've been on. I know I've
Yeah.
been asking a lot of stuff, so I figure you have something.
No, I mean, you talked about your announcing deal and everything, and recently, at the Indy 500, we had Hinchcliffe and Townsend Bell kind of going at it. Particularly when uh, s- um,
Santino
Dino
Ferrucci.
Ferrucci, yeah, when he had his deal on pit road, and that was a really entertaining bit during that, and kind of heard that maybe Townsend was kind of doing that on purpose, kind of cheering on for Santino there. But I wanted to know, maybe were there any dynamics like that where you're maybe, or somebody else was like maybe intentionally or playfully, like kind of arguing or doing some sort of shooting the bit during the broadcast, that you guys had that kind of same entertaining aspect.
We never sort of chose sides for that reason per se. I mean, obviously, the magic that was Uncle Bobby, and Posey, which was genuinely real. They couldn't have been more different, and they saw the world so differently, which was made for kind of TV magic. And whichever one you liked, you thought the other one was intolerable. But that's kind of why that tension worked. We didn't do that. It's funny. I used to always, before Paul Tracy got into TV, Terry Lingner. But it's funny because Lingner wanted me back in the booth every year that I wasn't. After I left, the owners and a bunch of drivers would try to get me back in the booth, and it never happened. I finally had a sit down with Randy Bernard. It was all set. The deal was all set. I forget whatever year that was, and he said, because what always happened if you talk to CART, they said the network has full control over talent. I said, well, you and I both know that you guys are the ones that, other than Indy, your partners. It's a time buy of sorts. So you have more juice than you want to let on, and it's your product that is at stake. So you really should. I said, I think you should flex your muscle. Terry finally convinced him to do that. I flew to Indy. I met with Randy Bernard and the gentleman from IMS Productions, and they were all on board. And they said, they've asked us to hold off until this Comcast merger takes place. And so I said, okay. And it was supposed to happen the next month. The Comcast merger happened. Terry said to Sam Flood, he said, hey, we need to deal with our IndyCar booth. Here's what Sam said, no, I know our booth. We're going with Wally Nollenbach. And so Sam wanted to go with Wally. The way I heard it, when Sam introduced himself to the IndyCar drivers and owners, Dario stood up and said, are you kidding me? He says, we need Kendall in the booth. And Sam said, listen, give him a chance. He hasn't even done a race. Da, da, da. A year from now, if you don't like it, you can tell me about it. A year from now, then Dario supposedly stood up and said, we put up with it. He hasn't been in the garage area once. And so there was always, but it never happened again after that. So that's just a behind the scenes story. So but with Paul, I knew when he retired, they thought he'd be great at TV. And I told Terry, I said, part of the problem you're going to have with Paul is Paul, in a weird way, is actually shy until he's comfortable. I said, so he needs to be paired with the right guy. Now, Terry wanted to try to get me. He didn't give up, and so he was before that meeting. He was trying to get me in through the pit lane, and he said, "You can't do the pits with your feet." I said, "No, I really can't." And so that he said, "Well, I'm going to put Townsend in the pits." Well, once Townsend's in the door, he's an animal. He works his way into the corporate suite, and he's been there ever since, and he's good. So, and Townsend style wise, we're not exactly the same, but we're kind of related, if you will, in that way. And so, but Paul, it took him a little while to find his feet, but Paul, needless to say, came out of his shell more than some people would like, I guess. I think you would have seen that dynamic with Paul and I, because we bicker like on text message, phone, we bicker nonstop, and we see the world differently, and we both are opinionated, and so it would have been interesting to see the two of us on the air, but that didn't happen.
Yeah,
well, I think the dynamic with being friends too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I saw
Yeah.
your Twitter post or retweet earlier where Paul ran into the back of, I think, Bruno Junqueira at Road America, and you had a really passionate argument in favor of Paul there, and I guess that kind of shows maybe the support there, but also, I mean, I think just the insight that you had, being as an announcer.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't communicated with him about that, but he and I got into it pretty big on text when I think it was Bourdais at Long Beach, when someone swerved and he had to release the brakes. He ended up in the pit exit to avoid a big crash. He ended up going around someone, and it was either Dixon or Bourdais. It was one of the two, and they got a penalty. And I said, "This is what happened. The only reason he went into the pit lane was to avoid the crash, and he had to release the brake to make the steering correction." And Paul's like, "No, that's not what happened." And then Bourdais came to me when the next time I saw him, he goes, "You were the only guy that understood what was going on there. That's exactly what happened." I said, "Yeah, well, I wasn't on the air, but
Yeah.
I call it the way I see it, and if I don't know, I don't have a strong opinion. But if I know, I have a strong opinion. So it's funny because Paul thinks I have it in for him. That's just part of his sort of shtick. Actually, I don't think he really does, but it's part of his shtick. And so, a funny story about '98 when I was doing those 5 races, I got hired by Team Cool Green to host an evening reception, a little Q&A thing with the executives at their hospitality. I do that, and I'm eating afterwards. I'm in line, and Paul's wife, Lisa, at the time, comes up to me and says, "I know you. You're the guy who says all that mean stuff about my husband on TV." This was at Houston, mind you, before he got into the fisticuffs with Barry Green.
Barry Green.
So she said, this was on Saturday night, I think, and Friday or Saturday. So I said, "Well," I said, "that's one way to look at it." I said, "Another way to look at it is I'm the guy that talks about all the stupid stuff your husband does on the racetrack on TV." And so I made a point. So she got in my face, and then I made a point. I said, "I'm going to sit at their table." So I sat at their table, and then Paul was laughing because I've known Paul since '92. No, even before that. And she goes, "Well, I have to admit, I really like your style, except when you're criticizing Paul." I said, "Listen," I said, I love Paul. I have no agenda. I said, "But I have to call it the way I see it." She goes, "Well, can you just be a little nicer?" I said, "I'm not being mean. And I usually don't editorialize. I don't say he's an idiot. I just say that was a horrible move or this." Well, when that happened at Houston in the race, Varsha comes to me, and I'm kind of like tongue tied. I'm like, "Well, I was thinking about what Lisa had said just the day before." I said, "I'm not sure what I could add to the pictures." I think is what I said.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was an insane time there between him and Dario, and then Dario ended up I think it was him and Juan Pablo in that championship too in '99 or something, and that was where I think Dario lost on a tiebreaker or something.
Yeah. Lost on a tiebreaker.
It might have been 99
No,
or
it was
98,
99.
I feel. Yeah.
I think so.
That was '99.
Because that was Greg Moore.
Yes, in Fontana. The one thing that people don't realize about Paul, I mean, Paul's kind of wired how Paul's wired, but when you get sort of incentives misaligned, and so Paul was kind of desperate for a deal because he got fired by Penske late, and he got on with Team Cool Green, but his deal was heavily incentive laden. So when you have a guy that has these huge winning bonuses, because you said we're not going to pay you a big salary, we're going to give you big winning bonuses, and then you tell the guy to hold station in second, what's he going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's Paul, he's like, no effing way. I don't know what the bonus was. It might have been $100,000 to win. It might have been $200,000. I don't know what it was. It was a big number. So, you're like, why would he just ignore an order like that? Well, that's exactly why he would ignore an order like that, is because his incentive is to he's got to win, so. There's always it's funny. There's always that's what I think is so great about this sport. What I've always tried to bring in, to the extent I'm able, is some of those behind the scene things. I joke about PR people in especially IndyCar, but kind of all types of racing now. They should relabel them. Let's make sure everything's okay, people. Let's make sure no one's mad at anyone, people. Let's make sure no one says anything controversial, people. And it's you know it's not what we need. So, you've got one of the most authentically dramatic things, but it's like it's the inside joke. Everyone in the paddock knows about it, but no one can talk about it, or no one will talk about it. So, kudos to that's part of the secret of Drive to Survive, is somehow they got the clearance to bring some of that, at least some of it, forward.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. Drive to Survive has definitely been a very interesting series, and you kind of see those dynamics that we haven't really heard about. Although I do think some of it might be a little bit fabricated, but certainly, yeah, it's definitely a good insight, and it's definitely bringing a lot of interest and everything. But I wanted to ask you, kind of pivoting back to, I guess, your origins and everything. You talked about going to school and going to UCLA, and obviously we know you had a finance degree from there. But want to know, like, did having that degree give you any kind of advantage during during your career? We talk about the finance and the business side of racing. Obviously it's very expensive, but having that background, did that give you any sort of kind of advantage during your career?
I don't know if it gave me. It's hard to quantify that. It's a good question. It it helped me in a lot of ways. Some of the economics thing, just principles like opportunity costs and stuff, are great ways to think in the world, and they apply even in racing. They apply to tangentially, to sort of you know optimizing your technical package, your rules package, and so forth. So, on the business side, I always loved business. So, in terms of trying to understand it from the company's stand, it probably did help me in that regard. I don't know if I can put my finger on it. At the end of the day, you're hired because you are either getting the job done here quick. You need to be presentable, and the more articulate you are, probably the better. But yeah, it's a good question. So it's helped me. I never have had a job per se in finance, but not investing and some of that stuff.
Right.
Obviously, it comes into play there.
Yeah, I mean, I see you tweet all the time about, different, I guess, investing things, and I've seen you talk about Tesla a lot. I mean, I kind of do a little bit of investing on my own and everything, so kind of want to, yeah, guess ask about that, like what's kind of given you an opportunity to, keep interest in that side on the, I guess, the market. We can talk about that a little bit, but what's been kind of your, I guess, goal, I guess, as kind of an investor, and do you do day trading? Are you more of a swing trader? Do you do options, or you just stay with just regular common shares?
That's a good question. It's evolved. I was always more an investor before. In what year was it? I want to say it was in right after I retired. I stumbled onto Investors Business Daily. William J. O'Neill, who just passed away a couple weeks ago, changed my view of things and kind of changed my life. I mean, he was the first person that sort of turned the world upside down in terms of, you've got to aggressively limit your losses. That's the only thing you can't recover from, whether you're a long-term investor. Most long-term investors have been brainwashed into buy and hold no matter what. That works until it doesn't. In the big drawdowns, you get crushed. And so I remember picking up that paper in my retirement, and I had nothing but time. I'd go to the coffee shop every morning, and and something about it resonated. It was like Greek, but I said, there's something to this. And so what his philosophy is, combining fundamentals where you screen the companies by the ones that have the good earnings growth, sales growth, return on equity, all of those things. But your timing decisions are based more on technical, which is chart patterns. And most people are either fundamentals or they're technical. He combined them both, which I think dramatically boosts your risk reward in your favor. So that's what I've done for the longest time. But I've always sort of wondered about short-term trading because technicals really allow you to not perfectly time the market, but pretty consistently time the market to a large degree. And so I said, this has to work on a shorter term. So during COVID, I really kind of went to school big time on trying to understand and do short-term, literally day trading, I guess. And I've done it. I feel like it's, comparing it to my driving, it's like I'm a top amateur right now. I could probably win a national championship in the runoffs, but I'm not pro and I'm not world class. You know, I can see that I'm getting better, and so again, that really protecting against losses is what blows up most traders of all types, especially day traders. And so I've had some really good runs, and a lot of times I kind of tread water, depending on the market. So now I will take this moment to get on my soapbox about two things. One I touched on, which is, you know, cutting your losses. You got to have some metric to get you out of the market. People spend all their time on how to buy their stock to invest in, and they'll ride them all the way down. And we saw that during the internet meltdown. You saw it with Microsoft in the late 90s. Microsoft was on a moonshot, and then it went sideways for literally 15 years. So you got to have something that tells you something has changed, but especially the big drawdown. So my mother has invested heavily in Apple, and it's worked out swimmingly for her. But I said, you know, if Apple ever falters, she'll ride it all. I don't know if it'll ever go to zero. She'd ride it all the way down because it's what took you all the way there. So you got to have something that tells you to get out. I use the 50-day moving average as kind of an absolute for me. I won't own anything below its 50-day moving average. So someone comes to me, if Elon Musk calls me and says, hey, you got to buy this stock, or CEO, I look, and if it's under its 50-day, sorry, I'll put it on my watch list and I'll watch it. And if it gets back above its 50-day, then I'll take a pilot or whatever. So that's one, is have some way to get out so you don't take huge losses. Don't let a big gain turn into a loss, and don't let a new position turn into a big loss, because that's the only thing you can't recover from. So that's one. And the other is, it's for common people. I think a lot of people never invest because they think, what's a couple $1,000 going to do? This is never going to do anything for me. And I think it's, you know, you can always rationalize the new iPhone, the new pair of shoes, the concert tickets or whatever, and it's hard. But the surest way to get wealthy is to save and invest over a long period. It's hard. Now you can invent a widget, you can invent an app, and that's a good way to do it if you hit. But the only sure way on a normal salary, if you live beneath your means and invest over 30 or 40 years and don't take any big losses, you will be wealthy, period. So that's my little soapbox for people, especially young people, to do it. So I'm happy to talk investing or even do a separate one on that, but
I might be more of a separate one.
I love it. We might, all the eyes are glazing over from the race people. Like, oh.
No, I mean, it's a good hobby.
And Josh's, that was the one thing that we talked about, how that was the one piece that following you and your posts definitely connects with that. I'm learning it. Some of it is foreign. I do a little bit of investing, but it's not to the level that you guys do. So but I'm always open to learning. So now I've learned how great of a racer you are, and now I get to learn about how you invest and how you've been able to go and flip properties, including the one you're sitting in front of, and all the stuff, and keep on. I mean, I think the other thing you have to do is also I always joke around with people that I'm friends with or people that I meet that have been married for a long time. I think you all have to go and like write a book or write like a few lines both parts of the couple and write one thing or like 5 things that work for you and for your, because I think that would also be great in our day and age of right now with the way things are and people breaking up at such a high level and all the nonsense, to stay together as long as you and your wife have done, and so many other couples are 30 years and 40 years and 50 years. It's a totally different dynamic than it was back in those days. People would figure things out or try to, versus now it's like, oh no, that's the end of it.
Well, our story is a little more involved. Namely, we were separated for 10 years, and anyone who knows me knows that part of the story. But and a lot of people in racing do. When we got back together, we didn't go through the normal stages of dating, and we both had worked hard to be okay on our own. And then when we started getting back together, the minute there was a little disagreement, both of us, one or the other, would be like, I don't need this. And so what it made me realize is, and that's one thing I think that's actually lacking in today's things, is actual commitment. So obviously you want to choose wisely, but people always think divorce is an option, and it is an option. But if you're fully committed, they never get to a 12. They get like, this sucks, but we got to figure this out. So there's a difference between you having one foot in the boat and one foot out of the boat. And the minute there's a problem, you're like, I don't need this. And so if both sides are truly committed, it's a lot easier to work through stuff. And so, you shouldn't be the only one committed if the other party's got one foot in and one foot out. But if both are committed, you kind of can work through it all, really. Because if both are committed, by definition, you're kind of have to be willing to, look at yourself. If only one side's committed to making it work and the other one's like, I'll take everything you give, that doesn't work. And I don't advocate sticking around if you're being used up. So
I had that experience.
Covered all here on the GSP.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you are a very knowledgeable man, and so we were hitting multiple angles here. We've kept you for, I think, an hour and a half. So I will say, I mean, Josh, do you have anything else? Or
I mean, I think we covered everything.
yeah, we definitely. And TK, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be able to talk to you for this long, and for Josh and I mean, it's just been awesome to have you on and talking about all the different things we talked about. I didn't get to ask about the Trans Am Mopar deal, but that's okay. That was kind of brief, but I asked you about the Viper thing, so I'm still happy. But thank you so much for coming on. Give my best to Pony. I know she's in the light over there, so walking in and out. So, and to the cats and all the other assorted furry friends that you have. Thank you so much, man. You're one of my racing heroes, and to be able to talk to you and have this time has just been awesome.
Well, kudos to both of you for getting to this milestone. 100 and what shows? What is this?
73 or yeah, 70.
173. Yep.
Yeah.
173. Well, kudos to you guys, and hopefully the next one won't take 2 years to orchestrate. I'm happy to come back on a periodic basis, but thanks for having me. Enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Tommy. Tommy Kendall, the motorsports legend who also knows a lot about a lot of things. So if you really need an answer, it seems like TK knows it. That's probably why IndyCar and Randy Bernard wanted him back, and then they screwed it up with Wally, which is kind of interesting since Wally and him never really crossed paths in Trans Am. But I think about our days in NASCAR, or when we watched NASCAR in the early 2000s and they randomly picked Wally Dallenbach to be in the booth with AB and BP. It made no sense then. He became better over time, but he wasn't an IndyCar guy. His dad was. They would have been better off with TK, and that year was a great year in 2011 until, of course, or 2012. I think because NBC, oh no, that's right. That was during the days of Versus, and then ABC had like a handful of races with Marty Reed making no sense, and then Eddie Cheever and Scott Goodyear kind of having that same dynamic that you brought up with Posey and Uncle Bobby, but much less likable. But thank you so much, Tommy, for coming on, and hopefully we can do this again. We might have to do a spin-off episode on investing just for the sake of society, but definitely we'll talk racing, no problem. Thank you, man.
All right, deal. Cheers, guys.
Yep. Cheers. All right. So yeah, we got to move.
Red, yeah, if you want to hang up, you have to hit the red circle.
Okay. All right, guys.
All right.
Cheers.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
All
problem.
right, thank you.
Yeah, just wanted
all
to make
right.
sure you did that, but yeah.
Yeah, because he was gonna stay on.
Yeah.
But it's all good. That was a blast, and now we can get on with the regular stuff. Not every day you get to have a motorsports icon on the show, so probably the best thing that's happened to me in a week or two. So I'm just internally grateful.
Yeah.
We'll get this show out. That's done. Won't have any problem getting this show out. So yeah, let's get into we'll talk about NASCAR first, Josh. Connecting it, of course, to TK, formerly going in racing there and having great success or almost winning. It's funny how Wally Dallenbach also had a similar situation in the 1995 Watkins Glen race when they threw a Phantom Yellow, and when he was driving the 22 car, and then that cost him the race. Mark Martin ended up continuing his win streak, and he won 3 years in a row, largely because of that. But yesterday it was a little more straightforward. It was definitely Martin Truex Jr. show, fourth win at Sonoma, 33rd career win. If somebody told me that a few years ago when I saw Martin Truex win in the 78 car, and that was his third career victory, and I think it was like back in 2015. And if somebody had told me he would have 30 victories between then and now, wouldn't have believed it. But ever since 2015 or whatever, Martin Truex has become a different guy, especially in the Cup Series. And yes, last year was an off year, but this year it looks like he's back to what his usual standard was. It's basically there was three guys that were dominant. It was Denny Hamlin, who started on pole but wrecked. His Truex and Kyle Busch. That was really the entire race. Only 2 cautions in the whole entire race. So it was a pretty clean, quiet day. The pace of Martin Truex, though, was undeniable. Second win of the year, and solidifies himself in the playoffs. And not like I think he was really worried about it the way the parity is this year, but dominant performance at one of his best racetracks, Josh, as they go into the off week for Father's Day weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Martin Truex went out and flat out spanked the field this weekend, I think. Although, it wasn't easy though, and definitely had a lot of challenge from Kyle Busch, and then also had to kind of battle with his teammate early on in Denny Hamlin, and comes out of it with second win and fourth win, like you said, at Sonoma. And he's a guy we don't really think of him as a road course racer. He doesn't really have the stats, or well, I mean, he does now, but I guess his persona as a race car driver, we don't really see him really as a road racer. But over time now, he's really done well at this racetrack in particular. He's started to do well at Watkins Glen as well. Had a chance to win there a few times, in the last couple of years and everything. But he's definitely been somebody who's quietly become a really good road course driver, and you have to give him a lot of credit. But also, Joe Gibbs Racing was in Toyota for the most part, was really good all weekend, so they really did a excellent job there, of course. And yeah, a very clean race for the most part. Of course, Denny Hamlin ran into the turn 12 wall coming to the start finish line and it ended his day. So maybe he'll ask for NASCAR to suspend the wall or something as actions detrimental to stock car racing or something like that. And that was a pretty interesting twist to the race. Of course, really the only real drama that happened in that event. Of course, late race yellows have been a thing in the past in Sonoma, but they weren't really a thing yesterday. And of course, we saw at the end Tyler Reddick also take a flat tire towards the very end, and then we saw him kind of loop back to the pits, in that, I guess, area of pavement inside turn 11 there. So great situational awareness for him to do that and save a yellow for NASCAR, because otherwise would have stopped on the track and caused another yellow, and maybe given Kyle Busch an opportunity to get up to Martin Truex and race side by side into turn 1, maybe do a little bonsai move like Jerry Nadeau did back in '97, so at Sonoma. But definitely a clean race there. I mean, it's not exactly, super entertaining. I mean, it did find a little bit intriguing, though, with, especially Kyle Busch having some ability. And of course, he's having a kind of a residuant year. And of course, he won at Talladega earlier this year. And then, back in his 08 year when he had that big year, he won at Talladega and at Sonoma. So there was always that possibility. And plus, the 8 car and road course has been really good. So there was always that possibility. But Truex just kind of drove away from him. At the end of the day, initially off of that final restart, Kyle Busch had a chance. He was, within a couple of car lengths, but then slowly but surely, Truex went out and pulled away from there. So, Truex was able to get the win and get his spot pretty much solidified when it comes to the playoffs. So, we'll see if he's able to, come out to some of these other road courses and get something, or if, this is just him being really good at Sonoma. But, we'll have to look out for him later on in the year as, potentially a guy that is a contender, especially after last year not making the cut and getting 0 wins. Really tough deal there for him. But, now on the other end here, he is solidly a contender here this year, and went out and partied with DJ Diesel, aka Shaq, after the race. So always a good bit when you're able to celebrate and party with Shaq. So yeah, it was maybe not the most exciting one, but especially with no stage yellows, it was definitely a fairly intriguing one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's Sonoma for a reason, and I mean, the real battle was between those two, 3 guys, because after that, I think the rest of the field led 9 laps, so it was really those guys, the typical guys with Gibbs and Hendrick, which has been the deal all year, kind of stood out as well. Truex over Kyle Busch. Joey Logano finishes 3rd. Chris Buescher 4th for RFK, continuing his recent streak on road courses. William Clyde Elliott II finished 5th. Tried to do alternate strategy, didn't work out. AJ Allmendinger was 6th. Michael McDowell was 7th. He was one of the guys that I think really had a fast race car, but the pits sequences did go out in his favor. Larson, who actually qualified the worst he's ever qualified at Sonoma, and he came back into the top 10. Christopher Bell and Ross Chastain round out the top 10. Kevin Harvick in his last race in Sonoma as a driver finished 11th. Oh, Richard actually got a 12th place finish. There was a time when he couldn't finish in the top 25 on a road course. I guess that 47 team is doing something. Yeah, and then there's a few other guys that scored stage points, but yeah, Reddick and Hamlin were the front row. Didn't have anything to show for it after yesterday. Ryan Blaney was the last car on the lead lap in 31st. The points as we go into the off week before Nashville. I mean, Byron and Busch are 1 and 2 in terms of playoff standings. Martin Truex leads the points overall by 13 over William Byron. And so that means he should probably be ahead of Kyle Larson under that. Ryan Blaney is third, tied for third, it looks like. And so he's 24 points back with Ross Chastain, and then 25 points back. In fifth is Kevin Harvick. The bubble is 3 points Alex Bowman over Daniel Suarez, the defending race winner at Sonoma. Keebler Gibbs is minus 11, Michael McDowell minus 14. So that's where they stand going into Nashville. AJ Allmendinger is 19 points behind McDowell. So he is 30 points out of 17th, 33 out of 16th. So that's that right there. Moved to the Xfinity series. Did not watch the race. I was not home. I was at a party and had enough sake to go and last a lifetime, kind of fitting the whole Jägermeister story that TK had. Aric Almirola won the DoorDash 250. Allmendinger second. Kyle Larson from pole finished third. He led the most laps. Keebler Gibbs fourth. Parker Kligerman fifth. Cole Custer, Justin Allgaier, Austin Hill, Sammy Smith, Sam Mayer round out the top 10. They only had 2 cautions in this race also, so that didn't really take too long. 79 laps, so yeah, 250 miles. Almirola, so top 4 were Cup guys. Chastain ran, he finished 18th. Ty Dillon finished 23rd. Trying to see. Failed to qualify Poole, Honeyman, and Mason Filippi. But yeah, in terms of the Xfinity series, Larson dominated, but late in the race, got passed. Or late race restart didn't work out for him, and they
ran into the tires.
Ran into the tires there, but recovered to finish third. But Aric Almirola gets RSS Racing their first ever victory in the Xfinity series. Michael Roberts Construction has been on Zane Smith's vehicles over time. When he won the championship last November, he had MRC on the truck. So, West Coast based company. Aric Almirola last win was New Hampshire a couple of years ago when it got too dark and they had to call the race early. I think it was like 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago now.
And it will be, for sure in a couple of weeks because he ain't going to win a cup race this year. So credit to him. And I'm pretty sure big deal for him and his family. Big deal for RSS Racing too, to be fair. But yeah, Larson had it pretty much locked up. There wasn't a whole lot that happened otherwise. The main players stayed up there the whole day for the most part. But when you have 4 cup guys, when you have as many cup guys as you had in this field, it was probably going to end up being what it ended up being. I think we both went and picked cup guys anyways. I'm just trying to remember offhand.
You picked Larson, I think, and I picked Allmendinger.
And you picked Allmendinger. And then my pick for the Cup Series was an absolute disaster. And Keebler Gibbs looked better than what it ended up being. So, yeah, the picks really went well. Unlike picking stocks, don't trust me to make picks if you really want to bet. Generally speaking, they don't go so well. But do you have anything to add to that for the Xfinity series, or?
You basically told the story there, but at the end, that last set of cautions kind of shuffled the field a little bit, and the announcers kind of brought up Aric Almirola as kind of a guy that if he had enough pace and if he was up front, that he could really potentially have an opportunity there to have a win right there, and had the last 3 starting in the lead, and then Kyle Larson got shuffled back a little bit, but had passed most of the guys on the first lap or two of that final restart, but then he kept dogging Aric Almirola throughout that last set of green flag laps, but then a handful of laps to go, just makes a little bit too much of a little bit of turn to the right, and knocks down the tires, and it just immediately goes straight left, coming out of the exit of turn 11. So just a missed opportunity for Kyle Larson, rare mistake for him, but at the end of the day, gives Aric Almirola, like you said, a chance to score victory for a smaller team, and it definitely gives him a chance to be in victory lane maybe one last time, as he's maybe not coming back to NASCAR at least full time on the Cup side. So we'll see what his future ends up being, but at least a little bit of a different wrinkle there, and not always the best car, most dominant car is going to win a race there at any level.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just being in the right place at the right time. Don't go and put yourself in a bad situation. That's kind of what road racing used to be. And so in that Xfinity race, when you had Larson make a rare mistake, that was a good job by Almirola to go and do that. And credit to RSS Racing and for giving him a good car. I don't know if it was an SHR car, but is what it is. Austin Hill goes into the off week, still leading with the win points, but John Hunter Nemechek leads the regular season standings. He's second. Then you have Allgaier, Custer, Chandler Smith, Sammy Smith, and Jeb Burton, who are all in with wins. Josh Berry, Sheldon Creed are pretty solid right now points-wise. Sam Mayer plus 41 over the cut line. Riley Herbst plus 27, and Daniel Hemrick is plus 18 over Parker Kligerman. Minus 9, a further 9 points back is Bruckshot Jones. So we'll see what happens as we move towards the Nashville race here in a couple weeks' time. All right, so move to the roundup. It's the 24 Hours of Le Mans, as we mentioned earlier with Tommy, talking about Ferrari winning 50 years after the last time they were there as a factory effort. Alexander Perguidi, James Collado, and former Formula One driver Antonio Giovinazzi gets the victory. They run 342 laps overall. Toyota number 8, the one remaining Toyota of Sebastian Buemi, Brendan Hartley, and Ryo Hirakawa finished 1 minute 21.793 back of the 51 Ferrari. And the Cadillac Racing team, the Ganassi team, finished 3rd and 4th. Their regular WEC car with Earl Bamba, Alex Lynn, and Richard Westbrook finished 3rd. A lap down, and a further lap back was the WEC or the IMSA car with Sebastian Bourdais, Renger van der Zande, and Scott Dixon. Then after that, you got a little bit more separation. The other Ferrari, Antonio Fuoco, Miguel Molina, Nicholas Nielsen finished 5th. The 2 Glickenhaus cars and the first Peugeot finished 8th overall. The Inter-Europol competition, number 34, a small Polish run outfit, didn't have radio at the end of the race, but somehow or another outlasted Team WRT with Rui Andrade, Louis Delatras, and Robert Kubica. The Duquesne effort, Rene Binder, Pino, and Neil Yanni round out the podium for LMP2. Those were 9th through 11th place. There's a couple other. The first GT-AM car was, of course, the Chevy Corvette. Ben Keating, Nicky Katsberg, and Nicholas Verone finished a lap ahead of the ORT by TF Aston, Al Harthy, Michael Dinan, Charlie Eastwood, and then the GR Racing Porsche, Wainwright, Barker, Para, finished just ahead, 5.3 seconds ahead of the Iron Dames. The ladies ran really well all race long, had the lead for a period of time. Unfortunately, weren't able to get the podium there. The Hendrick Motorsports of Garage 56 car actually, even though they're not theoretically classified, finished 39th. Had gearbox problems. Had to go and spend time in the garage to go and replace the gearbox, but was running really fast. I mean, when you look at the GT standings, I mean, you're talking about what, 5? They qualified faster than all the GTM cars. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They finished, theoretically, if they were in class, they would have been 10th in class. But Jimmy Johnson, Mike Rockenfeller, Jensen Button did a great job. They finished the race. The car was a revelation. I said it, I think yesterday or whatever. I said, well, it's interesting when you give somebody who actually knows how to build a good race car generally a clean sheet, you could see what can happen with it. And that's what happened with Chad Knaus and a lot of the men and women that were involved in this program. They took what is generally right now not exactly the greatest piece of machinery racing out on the Cup circuit and made it into a really racy car that was able to compete at Le Mans and not make a total fool out of themselves. 50 years after the last time a NASCAR vehicle drove at Le Mans. So that's the results there. The point standings as classification, I guess that's what it is. Season 23 results. So right now so FIA World Cup for hypercar teams. Oh, so that's for Jota, Hertz Team Jota for the privateer effort. So they're going to win their own thing. The World Endurance Championship manufacturer points, it's 18 points between Toyota and Ferrari right now. And then the Hypercar Championship, Drivers Championship, the 8 team of Hartley, Hirakawa, and Buemi lead by 18 and 25 points over the 51 team. And then the Cadillac number 2 is third. They're third in points. The second Ferrari, and the other Toyota, and then the first Porsche. So that's for World Endurance Drivers Championship. The LMP2 drivers, Louis Delatraz, Robert Kubica, and Rui Andrade lead by 4 points over the team Interpol team. And then we get the teams, Team WRT over Inter Europol, United Autosport, 20 points out in third. GT AM drivers, Ben Keating, Nicky Katzberg, and Nicholas Verone lead the points over Ahmad Al-Harthi, Charlie Eastwood, Michael Dynan. And it's a huge gap. They have, as it stands right now, it looks like they're going to lock up the championship more than likely at Monza here in a few weeks' time. That'll be huge for the Corvette Racing team and for Ben Keating as well. We'll go and move forward, go to MotoGP. Pecco Bagnaia went and won at home in Mugello. Ducati dominated, no shock. It seems like every race anymore. Ducati's took the top 4 spots. Pecco Bagnaia over Jorge Martin by 1.067 seconds. Johan Zarco was third to give Prima Pramac a double podium, nearly just under 2 seconds behind Luca Marini. Finished third. Brad Binder was fifth. The point standings heading into Sachsenring this coming weekend. Bagnaia pulls away from Marco Bezzecchi, who had a rough weekend, 21 points ahead, and he's in second. And then was it 24? Yeah, 24 points is Jorge Martin in third. Binder and Zarco round out the top 5 in points. In Moto 2 category, Pedro Acosta with another win over Tony Arbolino, Jake Dixon, Aaron Canet, Celestino Vietti, etc., etc. Joe Roberts actually finished 12th. So beat his teammate Dennis Foggia. Iagura gets the last point there. Sean Dillon Kelly. They're sponsored by OnlyFans. Oh, okay.
Good money.
It is good money. I gotta say, OnlyFans probably could get some of the chicks that make their money on there to get on the bikes. And I think it would probably be better than what the hell they're doing. American racing. I don't know what happened where the other American racing rider is, unless he crashed and he didn't make it or did not finish the first lap. There was 5 bike incident to start the race. Yeah, SDK is the only American racing rider there. Or the British guy they have there too. Whatever. And then the point standings for Moto 2 heading into Sachsenring. Acosta's 20 points behind Arbolino. And then there's a huge gap to Alonso Lopez, Salick, and Aaron Canet. That's pretty close between Lopez, Salick, Canet, and Jake Dixon. Only 8 points separating those guys. Joe Roberts moves up to 17th in points. He's right now, I think the goal, I don't think getting to 10th is really a goal or likely, but he could move himself up. He's only 14 points out of 12. So SDK, Rory Skinner wasn't there either. So that's the guy I was talking about, the other American racing bike. NHRA raced at Bristol, but they also were finishing out the New England Nationals. Justin Ashley ended up winning both the New England Nationals there, and then also winning Thunder Valley. Ron Capps, Eric Anders get their first wins of 2023 in Funny Car and Pro Stock, respectively. And then, what is it? Yeah, Stanfield. Yeah, and then what is it? Bob Tasca won the Funny Car class for the New England Nationals. Steve Johnson wins in Pro Stock Motorcycle, so credit to him. Was it Enders ends up beating Derek Kramer in the final. Ron Capps beat Alexis DeJoria. And then Justin Ashley beat Antron Brown, who came from the 15th spot to get into the final. Steve Johnson beat Gage Herrera, who basically has been dominant in this class. So for Steve Johnson, the wily veteran, been around forever in this class, to go and get that victory, credit to him on that. They'll be back in a couple weeks' time for their next race, which will be in Norwalk, Ohio, for the Summit Racing Equipment Nationals before they go on the Western Swing. Next race, Supercars at Hidden Valley. They'll be going there this weekend. As we've been saying all year, it's Chevrolet is dominating. The Erebus team, first and second in points. The Red Bulls are with SVG and Brock Feeney are fourth and fifth. Chaz Mostert's the one person in between that, with the Walkinshaw Andretti United Mobil 1 Ford. Cam Waters in a Ford. David Reynolds, Will Davison. So 4 Fords amongst 6 Chevys. The Chevys are dominating. Brody Kostecki leads the points over his teammate Will Brown by 87. We'll see how that all works out. And then, last but not least, we'll mention the Indy Next at Road America. talk the points briefly, which is Christian Rasmussen leading by 2 over his teammate Nolan Siegel, Hunter McElray 3rd, Daniel Frostford, Jacob Abel 5th, Louis Foster, Reese Gold, Matteo Nannini, James Rowe, Enam Ahmed tied with Ernie Francis Jr. for 10th in points. And then get further back, Jamie Chadwick 17th in points. So not the absolute worst, but not great either. We'll move forward then, get into the previews. 2 races this weekend on Father's Day weekend. First one, the Canadian Grand Prix. I mean, I think it's gotten old at this point. Are we both picking Max Verstappen or I don't know who picked first last week. I keep trying.
We have it there in the.
Yeah, so I'll look in the picks channel. So, yeah, I picked first last, so you can go and pick Max Verstappen. I'll just get ahead of it.
Yeah. Max Verstappen wins the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend. I think it's reasonable to say for podium. I'm gonna go with Fernando Alonso. He hasn't finished up in the podium recently, so I'll go with him to finish second. Plus, he did do really well, at least in qualifying last year at this event. Of course, did have some issues towards the end of the race, but now seems like this year's car definitely a lot more reliable with Aston Martin, and definitely one of the more surprising stories this year in Formula One. So definitely something that you look out for there. And then I think Sergio Perez gets 3rd place, gets back on the podium. Last couple of races hasn't been able to get quite up there. So yeah, that's what I'll go with this weekend. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I usually would go and deviate off of it. I'm not in terms of the winner to win, but I will go with Lewis Hamilton in 2nd and Alonso in 3rd. So Hamilton, Alonso, podium. I mean, we have to see what upgrades some of these teams bring to this race because we're getting into a busier time of the schedule after they cancel that. So you have Spain, then you have Canada, and then you have, it keeps on bumping me. So then after Canada, you have a couple of weeks between that race and then Austria. Then you'll race that race in the British Grand Prix back to back. Then there'll be a couple of weeks off before Hungary and in Belgium, which for the first time in decades happens before the summer break, unfortunately. So yeah, we'll see what some of these teams bring to the table. Renault, of course, Alpine has shown to have some more pace. Last race in Spain, there were some struggles for Alonso and for Aston Martin. Will they come back? What can Ferrari do in this spot? All great, worthwhile questions, to say the least. One that'll be a little bit more interesting race will be the IndyCar Series at Road America, bringing up the Siebkins bar. With Tommy, Kendall was talking about it when he was sitting at Station 5 hungover. One of the great passing zones there. The Sancio Grand Prix at Road America. They repaved the racetrack. The Moto America teams and riders were there this past weekend racing on that track. So interesting to see. They'll probably be setting track records this weekend because it'll be the smoothest this track has been since IndyCar returned to Road America. But I think for this race, I'm trying to think offhand who would be someone that would be a good choice. I mean, Pato O'Ward is one there. Palou has been really good there. Scott Dixon, Power, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can just name the whole entire effing grid if I really wanted to, but vast majority of the grid. But let me see. Elkhart Lake. So since IndyCar returned to the racetrack, it was 2007. Then they've been there since 2016. Joseph Newgarden won last year. He's won there twice. Palou won there in his championship year in 21. Rosenquist won his one and only IndyCar race there in the 10 car for Ganassi. Dixon has won there twice. Rossi when he drove the Napa car. And then Power. So I thought that Pato O'Ward had won. He came close to winning the race. That was my mistake.
Right.
I didn't. So, I mean, for Pato, he probably needs to get back on track. It's been a rough couple of races. Detroit was not good, and neither was the Indianapolis 500 at the end there. I say that Pato O'Ward goes and gets back on track. IndyCar at Road America. And I'll say Pato O'Ward as a winner to win. And then when it comes to wild card choice, this gets hard now and with the points the way they are. You have what, 27 drivers, but now it's really 26 because Connor Daly got fired. So 13. So yeah, the top 13 that count Christian Lundgaard. Who am I gonna pick? I'm gonna go with Callum Ilott. Why not? Callum Ilott will be my wild card selection. Juncos Hollander's had pace on and off here through the entire season. So as a wild card. So that'll be those are my choices. What about you, Josh? What do you see for this race here this weekend at Road America?
Yeah, I mean, those are some interesting picks there. But for me, I'm going to go with the other McLaren car in Alexander Rossi. Obviously, I think he's been the best out of the three McLaren entries this year. Of course, had a pretty good run a couple weeks ago at Detroit at the Grand Prix there, and has generally been consistent so far to start the year, and will only continue to get better. And I think Road America is definitely a track where he can excel at, and especially McLaren. Of course, they had pace there last year, like you said, with Pato O'Ward. But I think that Alexander Rossi has just been the best out of those three this year, and I think he finally gets his first win. With his new team here, so I'll pick. And then my wild card, I'm going to go with Rinus VeeKay, which might be an interesting selection, but I feel like this is a good track for him. He actually did miss a race here a couple years ago at this race back in 2021, but at the same time, I feel like this is a good opportunity for Ed Carpenter Racing. Of course, they let go of Connor Daly, but maybe Brian Hunter-Reay brings in some knowledge into that team that might help them on the road courses or anything, and certainly might get some value from having a veteran teammate like that to lean on. So I'd like to see what he's able to do. Maybe get a top 10 or something out of it, which I don't feel like is too crazy for him. He did have a road course win out at Indy Grand Prix a couple years ago, so I mean it's not that far fetched for him to I think do pretty decently this weekend here at Road America.
Yeah, and that's a good point you bring up about Captain America getting back in a full-time ride for the rest of this season, driving for ECR. It's kind of a round. It kind of how circuitous things go in motorsport. Once upon a time, Ryan Hunter-Reay drove for Vision Racing, which was run by Ed Carpenter's stepfather, Tony George, back in the day. So it's interesting how that all works out. That now ECR hires him. Connor Daly will be running the Nitro Rallycross this weekend with Travis Pastrana and them. I think in Oklahoma somewhere. So see what happens with that first weekend with Ryan Hunter-Reay back in a full-time seat. What comes of that, if there are any real changes come from that. Other than that, I don't really think there's any major changes that have taken place to really talk about, but we will definitely bring up everything that went on in Montreal and also at Road America next week on the GSP. Josh, it's your time. TK gave you props for winning the Indy 500, which is well deserved, of course, but you definitely earned it. You won it. So let's hear about what's going on in the world of iRacing and in the sim world and gaming with your sim segment.
Yeah, of course, and I was glad to be able to flex that one there earlier. But of course, iRacing, of course, very fun time to play on there. But this week, I'll talk about is what we did in week 13 last week with the 87 car running with the trucks and the Gen 4 Cup car at Daytona and Talladega. That was actually pretty fun doing that one. That was pretty interesting being able to run that closely amongst the 87 cars at regular Daytona with regular meaning the current configuration with the pavement and everything with how it is now. But interesting how you really had to manage the tire wear at Daytona and have to lift in the center of the corners and really have to take care of the right front and the right rear at that track. But you could also go full throttle or close to it the first couple of laps and definitely, make up positions and stuff. And there was a couple of times where I kind of wrecked out towards the end, but then took the pit stop and then came back and was actually able to make up pretty considerable amount of time, even though I was lapped down in terms of seconds to the leaders. So it's pretty interesting to be able to see just how new tires on an 87 car do on a repaved Daytona compared to, the leaders maybe running the whole race on old tires and then having to also navigate traffic of the trucks and the Gen 4 Cup cars there. So, it was definitely kind of interesting there, but I mean, it didn't count for anything. It's all exhibition. That's kind of what I did last week on iRacing. Kind of been busy with some other stuff there, so hadn't really been able to iRace too much. But and also don't know how much I'm going to iRace this week. But I did set up my laptop to have iRacing on it, so I could do that in my free time this week. So I'll be doing that, but I'll be doing it with the controller, so I'm going to have to try and see how does that work compared to the regular way, and kind of trying to do this because the Firecracker 400 is in a couple weekends or a couple weeks, maybe a month or so away from the preliminaries for that one with the first two heat events, I think the week of July 12th or July 13th. So want to be able to take advantage of that, and might be on mobile for that one. So I'm have to look at seeing if I bring my controller or figure out a way to have my wheel with me during while that happens. But definitely be interesting to see if I could pull that one off. But the Firecracker 400, the bring it back with Eraser GG, Parker Kligerman, Landon Castle's deal. Sure that Dale Jr. is going to try to get into that because he said in the promos for the past videos that this would be a sim racing event that he'd attempt, for the rest of his sim racing career, I think. So, be able to hopefully have a shot against, racing against Dale Jr. or, possibly another Cup Series star like Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch did this one, I think, too. I don't know if he made it out of the heat race that he was in, but he was definitely in it, and definitely would be awesome to be able to compete against somebody of that caliber and that talent there. So this week, though, I mean, of all the events coming up, if I can filter it by upcoming races for ovals, let's see here, fixed races. We got Cars Tour in North Wilkesboro. That might be interesting. Oh, the 87s at Michigan, 2009 edition with the before the repave, so that might be interesting there. Arca Menards series at Las Vegas. Cup fixed series. Okay, so it's still the old schedule. Oh no, Cup fixed at Sonoma. The historic circuit, so with the inner loop or the not the short shoot, aka the one with the turn that had Tommy Kendall with the flat tire back in '91, tied back to that. Gen 4 fixed at Michigan International Speedway, the current configuration there. So with the repave there on the road side of things, pull that up real quick. We got Mazda MX-5 at Charlotte Roval, Radical Racers at Road America. I'm trying to see this series because the Missionar Challenge, trying to see which one is that. Oh, Porsche Missionar at Road America this week, or Laguna Seca, sorry. Then the Formula Ford's Rookie Series at Laguna Seca, the Toyota GR cars at VIR, and then you've got open wheel. Let's see, Formula IR at Okayama Circuit. That might be interesting there. Then you have, let's see, GT4 at Olton Park. That might be interesting as well. GT3 Ferraris at Watkins Glen International with the boot, so that might be fun as well. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities this week on iRacing. Hopefully, maybe I can try to do a test run or something like that while I'm on mobile here. But yeah, I'll definitely see what later this year, especially with the Firecracker 400 coming up. Try to start making prep for that, so I can try to actually qualify in at least from the heat to the, I guess, because you have the heat and then you have the elimination qualifying and then I think the real event, and then there's a consolation. So it's probably going to be a little bit of prep for that, and got to do some research and see what I need to do from last time in terms of setup, I guess, to make sure I can make it in. But that should be fun, and that's also got a lot of prize money as well, so that might be fun to be able to compete for that for a little bit of bragging rights. And also, I think if you actually do win that one, there's a big trophy that comes with that, so would be fun to have that and then brag about that along with the Indy 500 and be the only one, since they only run two officially, to be the only one that has won the Indy 500 on iRacing, and Firecracker 400, a legitimate paid private sim racing event, be able to do that. So that might be interesting, and hopefully I'm able to get into it. So we'll see. Couple weeks, month or two, so month and a half, so we'll see. But yeah, that's it for sim racing segment here this week. And of course, as always, when I do stream, you can follow on Twitch TV/usailor2, and go on there and see all my streams and everything, and see my driving style, very cool, calm, and collected. And I don't say much, but there are times when I do, and that's sometimes that happens. It's just the heat of the moment. That's how it is. But that's where I have my Twitch, of course, my Twitter at JP Huffine. Of course, see all my takes, see all my opinions. We'll post the show there. We'll make sure to tag Tommy Kendall in there so you can share the show as well, and everything. Go in there at JP Huffine on Twitter, and of course, Actually, I mean, I'll have some takes there, and wanted to briefly bring up the fact that there's a possibility that the Jacksonville Jaguars may play at the Daytona International Speedway in the near future, in the next couple of years, as they renovate TIAA Bank Field. And that might be a really interesting combination there. And actually, as if you've been following that storyline, there's been some reports of where they would go, whether it be at the Speedway or would they go to Gainesville at the Gators Stadium there, or they go to Orlando. And Daytona might actually make the most sense because logistically, it's the easiest one to get to. All you do is go south on 985. There's plenty of lanes, plenty of space there. If you go through Gainesville, you got to go through Highway 301. You got to go through a bunch of hick towns that they purposely take the speed limit down to 35 and speed trap you there with the sheriff and everything. So I experienced that well, I didn't actually get the ticket, but having to go through that process of slowing down, speeding up, slowing down, speeding up in Gainesville over my four and a half years there. So definitely don't want to do that. And having about 15,000 people going down that way to Gainesville to see a game every other Sunday sounds like a pretty bad time in terms of traffic. So wouldn't do that. Orlando too far. So I think Daytona is the best opportunity for that if they end up having to play outside of Jacksonville there. So makes the most sense logistically, and I think they have the infrastructure to make it happen as well. Playing on the front stretch grass, and plus expand the fan base outside of Jacksonville a little bit. Branch over more into Central Florida, which they have a presence, but it's not as big as the Bucks or the Dolphins. So I think the Jags run of success that they're going to have with Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson and company. I think it's an opportunity to have if they end up having to play outside of Jacksonville, potentially in Daytona. So that should be interesting there. Just want to give my take on that. But it would be a great combination, and definitely a lot of collab between Jacksonville and the NASCAR and Daytona. Looking forward to that if it happens. But there's that, of course, and then our YouTube channel, which will have the Tommy Kendall interview here, and this episode have it on Gripster Podcast at Gripster Podcast on YouTube. So definitely take a look at that on there, and definitely see both of our faces, and of course Tommy Kendall's there. So definitely look at that. But yeah, subscribe and follow, like, comment, and subscribe on our page there. So yeah, of course, Phil, thanks for having me on, of course, again this week. And of course, glad we got to talk to Tommy Kendall. A lot of great conversation there. I think probably the best racing guest that we've had on there. And someone that we've had a couple of guests on here that are directly from the racing industry. I can tell you, I feel like this one is definitely the best one we've done, and definitely learned a lot of great stories from him, and definitely learned a lot of things, in general about his career and his backstory and everything. So glad we were able to finally have it on for that. So yeah, appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Your questions had Tommy thinking, so there you go. I mean, you waited a while, but you brought him out. You brought out the heat. And the fact I made it through, I'm glad. I don't know how I did it, but then it's the same way as I did with Ralph Shaheen. But to have Tommy Kendall on has been a dream because of never really being able. I've talked to him on the socials, but it's like to actually have a chance to talk to him as a guest is an honor and a privilege. I think I'm going to be flying the rest of this week because it was we had fun. We did a great job there. He was open and told us a bunch of stories and a bunch of things that even he'd never told before. So definitely something you want to listen to. If you do listen to GSP, then it's no big deal. But basically anywhere you get podcasts, you can get the Gripster podcast. I'll be on the Grid Talk probably this weekend for the Canadian Grand Prix race recap. But other than that, you can follow me at PG Matthew 28 on Twitter. You can follow me at Philip G Matthew 28 on Insta. Definitely follow our YouTube page, Gripster Podcast, and then we're on Twitter at Gripster Pod as well. So follow, like, subscribe, the whole bit. And we will be back next week, post Father's Day edition of the GSP, to talk about Road America for IndyCar, Canadian Grand Prix, and then preview NASCAR Cup and Xfinity at Nashville, Trucks at Mid-Ohio, along with a bunch of other racing series, including IMSA coming back for the 6 hours at the Glen next week. So we'll get in all that. Thank you for listening to GSP, and we'll see you next time. Take care.